Good afternoon, colleagues, members of the media, those who are listening to us on ZBVI and social media, who are watching us on television. A pleasant good afternoon to each and every one of you. We call this press conference here this afternoon, approximately a week after we held the last press conference, to explain the circumstances of us walking out the House of Assembly on Tuesday. Those of you who understand the parliamentary process know that the role of the opposition is to question and scrutinize the work of government. We have to ensure that government does not take any steps which might negatively affect on the people of these Virgin Islands. Our role is basically to check the excesses of the government. If the government feels that there are overwhelming number of questions, perhaps that is an indication that meeting as members of the opposition, it will give the public the opportunity to scrutinize programs and policies and regulations that the government would for the public interest. So it is important that if the government feels that we are asking too many questions, and the questions that we are asking are questions that the public is asking us to ask the government. We were elected by the majority of people in the Virgin Islands to the parliament or the legislature. And our job is to, as I mentioned before, is to scrutinize the programs and policies of the government. That is what we are doing. Last Tuesday, we had no choice but to take the only action the opposition had or has at their disposal, that is collectively withdrawing from the assembly. And we did that because we had discussions with the Premier. I had discussion with the Premier on Monday where he told me he was going to reorder the order paper. And I told him, Premier, we cannot do this. Because I don't know if you guys remembered, this meeting was held specifically to deal with the Public Accounts Committee, because on the 13th, when we had the meeting where we were dealing with Heroes and Forefathers Day, there was a discussion with the Premier and the Speaker and myself, and we agreed that we will have a meeting on the 31st of October to deal with the matter of the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee is a very important committee of any legislature. Anyone from all around the globe scrutinize government's action. And we feel that after 7 months, almost 7 months, and this committee was not formed and he was relegating it to the end of the other paper, we were not pleased. And we discussed it as a group, and the action was collective and unanimous to not participate in the House. So this is why we are here today. To see individually, my colleagues will explain you in more details some of the the programs and procedures of what happened and why we could do exactly what we did. And we take exceptions to the public service telling the speaker or telling us how many questions we can ask. Like I said before, if the questions are many, we shall have more frequent meetings so that we can deal with the public business in an organized, democratic. This is a democratic process. Without it, you're heading into anarchy, and we cannot afford for that to happen. So based on those few words, I would like to now turn to my colleague on the left, Honorable Buddha Meta, to continue the process.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. I'd like to acknowledge the protocols established by the Leader of the Opposition. Thank you to the media for being here again. You need to play in our community to keep all people informed is paramount. To the viewing audience and those who are listening, thank you for tuning in this afternoon. This press conference was called to offer clarity and perspective as to the events that occurred on the 5th sitting of the House of Assembly on October 31st. I will offer my perspective as to why I, Stacey Mather, on that day decided to join my colleagues and leave the House of Assembly, and also address a few matters that the public has asked me. Standing up and walking out of the House of Assembly was not an easy decision for me, nor was it done with the intention of mischief, but rather done as a call for doing what is right. There exists a political culture in the Virgin Islands that continues to serve the egos of those who seek to pass the blame from one administration to the other. It continues to be fueled by pointing out whether it was a VIP government or NDP administration, and this party politics and campaigning has been seen for what it is, an utter waste of time. I am convinced that my colleagues in the House of Assembly have enough erroneous and selfish examples of what administrations have done, whether it be a ruling government or opposition. Our country needs to see elected officials, willingness to get past their chatter and just do what is sensible now and for the future of the House of Assembly. For example, at the sitting of October the 13th, the Premier, before the sitting commenced, informed the members of the opposition of his intentions to make adjustments to the order paper. It was received without contention, and I appreciated his approach. However, on October 31st, we entered and sat, all 13 of us, for at no fault of any. At that time, I've had an open and frank conversation with the members of the opposition. He could have stated his intentions to reorder the order paper and explain why. If the conversations were properly had and explanations and timelines for answering those questions were given, I am certain we would have a different outcome. We as leaders owe the public the respect and maturity to sit and discuss things before they get out of hand. A compromise could have been found then and there. It was not until we sat for almost 3 hours, had a lunch break, returned and a motion was brought up that the order paper be arranged. There was no mention at that time whether the questions would be answered in that sitting. There was, of course, no indication as to when another sitting would take place, because as the public is aware, we do not have a schedule. Hence, we are now at the end of October, going into November, which will bring about standing finance and preparations for the budget. So when would our questions be answered? As is expected, the Speaker put the motion to rearrange the order paper to a vote. And of course, the motion was carried because the government has a majority. I stood up to ensure that my frustrations with the lack of courtesy and professionalism that could have been used to avoid the outcome, that outcome was not considered. As peers, there should be a level of respect for each other. Over the past 36 hours, there have been suggestions of how we can improve what took place and bring balance to the House. As it has been said, and I stated before, establish a schedule of dates for the House of Assembly. make the House of Assembly as booked and as busy as the government is while they are traveling all over the world. Extend the time frame for submission of questions. As it stands, it's 7 days. Give the members more time to prepare questions and give the civil service more time to provide responses. Limit the statements made by the ministers. We had 23 statements that took 3 hours on Tuesday. Host sittings for questions. This will allow for clearer expectations for both sides of the aisle as to what we are there to do. It cannot be acceptable to offer solutions in a public domain and not try as leaders to put them in place. The House of Assembly should have the same urgency as other institutions and bills that get first and third readings in the same night. There must be courage on all of us to make the decisions that help both the government and the opposition function in the way they were intended to do so. It is not a time to be fighting over and over again, just for political points. I would also like to address the formation of the PAC and the third SAP of 2023, which was passed on Tuesday night as well. At the sitting of October the 13th, I spoke to the members of the government one-on-one and asked them to push and encourage their side to push for the formation of the PAC. I reminded them of the importance of this committee. And for the listening audience that has asked me, here is the value of the PAC. The PAC is there, as the Leader of Opposition has stated, to scrutinize the value for money, the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of public spending, and generally holds the government and the civil servants to account for the delivery of public services. Yet despite the opposition submitting all names for all committees, the PAC was almost delayed for 7 months. The other committees were formed in September. Now we head into the last months of the year and the national budget will be discussed and debated on. However, the PAC, which was constitutionally due to be in place, was only done 2 days ago. There was nothing stopping the PAC from being formed before October 31st. It was solely at the discretion of the Premier to bring it to the House. Despite getting legal opinions on what he was trying to do as it related to putting a junior minister on the PAC, it was still held up. How can this be seen as good governance and not standing in the way of the opposition doing their job? Furthermore, the SAP, which is an addition to the budget, was not on the order paper, which was amended 3 times for that sitting. I learned of the SAP as it was mentioned by the Premier when he stated his motion to reorder the questions. Now the SAP would have been passed, and it did without the presence of the opposition. But how is it productive and good governance to not send it before the sitting to give us a chance to view and prepare? We have lobbied for more resources for the opposition and listed the needs for research and staffing. Yet the Premier's efforts towards helping the opposition is to include funds for a vehicle for the Leader of the Opposition. How does that help us get the people's work done? I walked out of the House of Assembly because as a representative for the people, I needed to stand up and draw attention to these things that must stop. As I've said before, I am committed to working with anyone on either side, and we are all elected by our people. The petty politics of blaming past administrations or justifying actions that were not professional should not be the order of the day. Our people deserve leaders who are building the government and the opposition for the next generation of leaders. In doing so, we should be fixing the wrongs of the past and not dwelling on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader of the Opposition and members of the Opposition, to the listening public, as well as the media who is here with us today. I stand here or sit here today with my colleagues to address some of the issues surrounding our walkout on Tuesday's sitting. I don't think that it is at all new to anyone my ability to stand for what I believe is right, because it's been proven over the years. Stand in the face of criticism and stand when sometimes you're the only one standing, but all 6 of us in the opposition stood and walked out because we felt the need to not just have our voices heard, but allow and show the government that they cannot continue to run the House of Assembly or try to run the House of Assembly as an extension of the executive. So I am here to put my voice towards some of the issues surrounding what happened on Tuesday. It is highly unlikely that Tuesday sitting, after receiving statements for, as my colleague said, for 3.5 hours, 23 statements, I think 10 of which were brought by the Premier, 15 minutes each. We sat through them as an opposition. All 6 of us were there. And when we realized there were something happening in the middle of the proceeding, a recess was called. The members of the government went to the back and had a huddle or a caucus, if you want to call it that. And then they came out to move this motion to amend the order paper. But as the leader of opposition said, what was agreed for this sitting, because there was not going to be a sitting on October 31st, what was agreed on between the Premier, the leader of the opposition, and the speaker who held the discussions with them, was that we would allow for the formation of the Public Accounts Committee, and we would allow for questions to be asked in the Honorable House, since our first set of questions from June will not be able to be asked until September. The Virgin Islands does not belong to the Honorable Natalia Whitley, the Honorable Lorna Smith, and the entire Virgin Islands government who sit in power. The Virgin Islands, the House of Assembly, belongs to the people of the Virgin Islands. And I would start this discussion really quickly by saying, if you don't pay attention to what happened in the past, you're going to repeat it. And I see trends, I see actions, I see attitudes being carried out to what led this very country and led this government to where we were and ended up on April 22nd and 23rd of 2022. If we're not careful, this egotistical, narcissistic type of behavior that because you have the majority, you feel that you can do what you want, but you have a government, you have an opposition who is at every step of the way trying to extend the olive branch to support the advancements of our country, given the nature, given the amount of things that people are facing with the lack of water, with the lack of food, with the lack of any progression happening in the country, in movement, in education. Everything is just as a standstill. But yet you decide to take this move for your interest. So I'm going to spend some time on the Trade Commission, which the Deputy Premier was responsible to move the order, and she suspended the Trade Commission Act, or the Trade Commission Board. And the history recalls, because I did some research, the history recalls that this Trade Commission, works were done on it starting from the time before Honorable H. Lavity Stout had passed away in 1995. From 1995, it was passed in the Honorable House in 2019, but then assented to later in 2020 by Governor Jasper. And going back to the records of the House, I realized that the members who stood in support of suspending the act, 3 of which were in cabinet, including the now Premier, and the now Minister of Education, the Minister of Communication and Works, and the Minister of Health, they all stood in support of that act and that board coming into place. So I would quote, Honorable De Castro said that the Trade Commission is the vehicle passed to monitor the consumer protection. She talked about the price reflected on items and the receipts that are important, and she stands in full support of this bill and a slew of legislation helping to support the bill. Honorable Reimer, he talked about the work starting from 1995 and the benefit of consumers being protected based on price. He talked about telecom and address, and he knows that persons will receive some redress from the law coming into force and the board coming into force, and people will get what they're paying for to support the Trade Department, which was grossly understaffed and unable to carry out their functions. When we go to Honorable Vincent Whitley, he spoke about these things take time, so he was happy that it was brought under his administration in 2019, 2020, and he commended all those, including Honorable Penn, who worked on the bill and talked about us building institutions for our developing society. We are helping, he said, to protect the consumer from the vendor and to support with the support from the commission. The Honorable Premier, now Premier Natalia Whitley, he says, a great round of appreciation to the meetings that were held in the public, to the consultants, to all persons that worked, and the stakeholders that got involved during the consultation process. And this government delivered on something that people have been speaking about for years and years. And he is not with a government that talks, but he's in a government that delivers on its promises. He said in closing that it works in the business favor, and we will continue to look at the regulatory factors and the shipping, looking at areas that affect the way prices will be carried out and the way the people of the BVI deal with consumer protection and the whole issue of trade. This was 2020. On Tuesday during their debate, the members moved to suspend this very board. You have 7 persons allowed to be on the board according to Section 5 of the Act. 7 persons that are credible. And if I go to the Act, it says, Section 5, notwithstanding any other law contrary to this commission, the principal body in the Virgin Islands promoting business, trade, investment, and consumer affairs without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing, the function of the commissions are 1, to advise the minister on all matters related to trade, investment, and consumer affairs, including the most suitable implementation mechanisms for stimulating and promoting the development of businesses. B, to review the economic performance of various sectors of the economy, identify constraints, and make recommendations to the minister with respect to specific sectors to optimize performance. C, examine the existing institutional framework for the business and trade and recommend practical measures for their improvement. Continuing all the way down to F, conduct research and studies and publish reports and information regarding matters affecting the interests of the business and consumers. Cooperate with and assist with the trade associations or a body of persons in developing and promoting the observance of standards of conduct for the purpose of ensuring compliance. Now you had 7 persons. 7 persons that were applied for and appointed to this board. 7 persons who were credible persons. Not the first set. Not the first set that were handpicked by the former premier. A set that Honorable Penn and I sat in the cabinet and agreed to put in place. But you have one individual who, this is where we come into leadership. This is where we come into the ability to make decisions and have discipline. The PAC, Public Accounts Committee, is still unable to be formed because you have right now the Premier appointing all his members as ministers. And according to the law, none of them can serve as a member of the Public Accounts Committee. So this has gone on since we've been sworn in from April to this present day. He has not made a decision because he's afraid to upset his apple cat. And he's talking about who want to be premier and who want to be deputy premier, but every day he behind all the way over here to come over on his side because who he don't want to fire and he afraid will leave. If we're going to talk the things, let's talk all the things. Because every day, the members will tell you, we getting phone call and WhatsApp from his supporters to come on this side because he needs support. But that's the Public Accounts Committee. You go to a minister now who has been appointed. Work's been done from 1995 to 2023. A board that has been set in place to do work, to carry out the functions, not just for consumer protection, for the issuing of trade license, for understanding how we put things in place from all investments into the country. And one individual, the premier, refuses to tell no. This is not right. they all now sit in the House of Assembly with a different tongue just about 3 years later to say we're suspending it and we're supporting it. So what happened to all the support you had for the institution and the bill coming to force in the first place? It is a walking contradiction. It's continuing if you pay attention. And if we pay attention in the Virgin Islands, people, we will realize this is just a continuation. There is no plan. We're asking for plan. We're asking questions. You're hearing complaints that they don't have enough time. But I learned today, the leader of the country spent about 2.5, 3 hours. He had time to talk. You have work to do, sir. And the people of the Virgin Islands are hurting. The people of the Virgin Islands are looking forward for leadership. And I am asking this government, while the opposition is here, and I said it on the first press conference, and I mean it, if you are not willing to lead, get out the way. The opposition is willing and ready to lead from the back. And if we will continue to agitate, we will continue to fight and stand up on behalf of our people, because the Virgin Islands deserve better. And where we are right now, we cannot afford another day with the same type of behavior, the same type of egotistical thing. It is not about you. The Virgin Islands and its people is bigger about any self-interest or anyone seeking to make things about themselves. So I am here with supporting the members of the opposition on behalf of the people of the 2nd District, that we will continue to fight and make our voices known, that change must come, whether they want it by will or by force. But this Virgin Islands will become a better place, given all that it's been through. Thank you.
Member for 6.
Good afternoon to the people of the Virgin Islands, especially the good people of District 6, members of the media, and my colleagues around the table with me. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of our territory is not good. We are dealing with perhaps the most challenging of times in recent memory. Our economy is struggling. Unemployment is high, and not just among young people, but across a spectrum of eligible workers. Our social safety net is weak and currently is not sufficiently assisting the most vulnerable residents in our country. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Roads, ports, having access to potable water are daily problems for residents. Businesses are struggling to keep their doors opened. Cost of living continues to rise and is putting certain commodities out of the reach of ordinary citizens. My people, we have challenges. Challenges that I know bring a sense of hopelessness and despair to many. The situation also angers many, particularly those who understand how the economy works and have offered up suggestions to the government on how to improve it and how to go about addressing the myriad of problems that I've mentioned above, in addition to many more that I have not mentioned, simply because the government is either unable or unwilling to meet challenges. The reality of the matter is that no government can fix the problems of any country on their own. They need the assistance of civil society and that of their other duly elected colleagues. I can say unequivocally that this opposition has been privately and publicly offering its assistance to the government on the multitude of issues confronting us. The vehicle that provides the greatest opportunity for cooperation between the government and the opposition is the legislature, or what we call the House of Assembly. It is also the place where the executive government is held to account by the people through their duly elected representatives. The government has the added benefit of over 58 years of legislative experience and over 30 years of executive governmental experience combined in the opposition, which, if tapped into, would augur well for the country. Unfortunately, as the evidence has shown, there is a lack of good leadership and experience in management of governmental affairs existing currently within the government of the Virgin Islands, and yet the government continues to refuse to take advice, even on parliamentary matters, which they are still grappling to understand and appreciate. The public saw its first sign of this situation at the inaugural sitting of the Fifth House of Assembly. The Premier was advised by us that he could not appoint a junior minister as Deputy Speaker because it would be contrary to the Constitution of the territory. We explained that the constitutional amendment that was made to provide for junior ministers equated them in nature to quasi-executive ministers. You saw the Premier still stood up during the session and nominated a junior minister as Deputy Speaker, only to have to withdraw his application moments later. A similar situation occurred in the formation of the Public Accounts Committee. We operate under the Westminster system of government, which is built strongly on conventions. By convention, ministers cannot sit on the Public Accounts Committee because they are a part of the executive branch of government. As I said previously, junior ministers have been equated to ministers by the constitutional amendment that was made. The Premier, yet again, still held up the formation of the Public Accounts Committee for almost 7 months because he again refused to accept the advice that was given to him. Just this week, a meeting of the Standing Orders Committee was called, or last week I should say, by the chairman, Honorable Kai Reimer. During that meeting, the Premier raised 2 amendments to the Standing Orders that he was adamant that he wanted to see happen. The first was to change the definition of minister, as it is currently defined in the Standing Orders, and revert to the old meaning from the Standing Orders of 1979, where the definition of minister was not well articulated as it is now. If the 1979 definition is adopted, then it allows a junior minister, who in 2023 is now equated to a minister by the Constitution, to serve on the Public Accounts Committee. The Premier is prepared to take the advancement of the House of Assembly back 44 years to get what he wants done. If the Premier wants to have a member of his government to sit on the Public Accounts Committee, all he has to do is to disappoint one of his junior ministers and then place them on the committee. Rather than doing this, he is prepared to tinker with the rules of the House to suit his particular situation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is wrong. The second change that the Premier was adamant about making to the Standing Orders was to limit the number of questions that opposition members can ask ministers of government. This is something, to the best of my knowledge, that has never happened in our Legislative Council, as it was called then, or now the House of Assembly. Members of the House ask questions not of their own volition, but on behalf of the people who send them to the House to represent their interest. Many persons in my district and even outside my district who want answers on matters affecting them utilize the questions and answers segment of the House sittings to get answers that they would have not normally gotten from their government. To limit the number of questions asked by members is tantamount to limiting the voices of the people who sent us, all of us, both the government and the opposition, to the House of Assembly to represent them. I provided this backdrop to give an understanding of some of the rudimentary issues that we have been facing behind closed doors with this government. The government seems not to be taking their legislative responsibilities seriously. We were elected to the House of Assembly on April 24, 2023. This is the 2nd day of November 2023, and we have only had 3 sittings of the House to transact business on behalf of the people. The House of Assembly or the legislature is the highest lawmaking body in the land. It is from the legislature that ministers derive their executive powers. During a general election, persons are elected to the House of Assembly. You are not elected as a minister. You are appointed as one only because you were elected to the House of Assembly. Therefore, the first call of duty of any elected official is to the House of Assembly. I have since come to the realization that the government does not want the House of Assembly to meet regularly because they dread having to be questioned by the opposition on behalf of the people of the Virgin Islands. The House of Assembly appears only to be called when the government needs to do something that they cannot do without coming to the House. It has become the trend to renumber the order paper of the day, to place questions at the end of the sitting, and bring all government matters to the fore of the order paper, when in fact, the standing orders or rules of the House in Section 11 lays out the order of business. I'm not saying that there will not be circumstances under which reordering the order paper may not be necessary, but it cannot be the norm. And when coupled with the things I've mentioned above, it shows a government that doesn't want to be held accountable to the House of Assembly and by extension, the people of the Virgin Islands. The trend has been that once government business is dispensed with, after reordering the order paper, the House is then adjourned for weeks, during which time the government members take off on a jet flying spree at your expense, with no tangible deliverables upon their return. And when they return to the House for the questions and answers portion of the business of the day, they cannot answer the questions adequately. One minister even mentioned that he is only reading the answers that were given to him by the technocrats. Mind you, this is the minister with the responsibility for the subject matter that he's being asked about. The business of the House of Assembly must be taken much more seriously than it's being taken right now. Just a few weeks ago, we were examining the Integrity in Public Life Act for the purpose of making amendments. While I perused the act, I wondered if the government read the bill that they passed into law, because if they did, I don't think they would have allowed some of those provisions to form part of it. We saw the financial disaster caused by the passage of the Retiring Allowances Legislative Service Amendment Act. Those who do business with government and even the civil servants are having an extremely difficult time moving government business along because of the Procurement Act, which has almost brought the government to snail pace. The point I'm making is that the work of the House is extremely important because there are real life implications for people if things are not done right. At this recent sitting on Tuesday, the 31st of October 2023, the Virgin Islands Trade Commission Suspensory Act 2023 was placed on the order paper, which would have called for the standing orders to be suspended to allow for the bill to have its first, second, and third readings in one swoop. While suspension of the standing orders does occur in parliamentary democracies around the world, it is reserved for urgent and pressing necessities. Our practice in this House of Assembly has been to allow for the suspension of the standing orders, to allow the appropriation bill and bills relating to financial services to be dealt with in this manner. This Trade Act did not meet the threshold and should not have been done in this way. The purpose of having the first reading of a bill in one sitting and the second and third in another is to promote and welcome public feedback on the bill. There are some very important issues surrounding cost of living, etc., that are points of consternation for the people, and so feedback should have been allowed rather than the very arbitrary approach that was taken. Again, another example of the government using the legislature as a rubber stamp for their business. The schedule of additional provisions, or what we commonly refer to as the SAP, for some $14 million or so, was passed on Tuesday night. Up until the time we walked out of the House of Assembly at around 4 p.m., we did not receive a copy of the documents for this bill. So the opposition is being expected to debate a bill to approve government over expenditure of some $14 million without having sight of any of the documents to show the expenditure and to properly prepare for debate. I walked out of the House of Assembly We walked out of the House of Assembly to make it lucidly clear to the government that it is not business as usual. This country is at a critical juncture with severe fractures currently at the governmental, executive, management, and leadership levels, and now at the legislative level. Failure cannot be an option for us in this country because we have too much at stake. My advice to the government is to stop the Dolly House and let us work together diligently to get this country back on track. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. Pleasant good afternoon to the media, colleagues, persons who are watching live and listening on said BVI radio. I stand here in solidarity with my opposition colleagues. You heard some very specific information, particularly in terms of the details of how we walked out of the House the other day and the rationale behind of it. I want to make it very clear that you have to stand on principle. And we stood on principle. We had a meeting that was called specifically for the purposes of the Public Accounts Committee and to deal with the issues of question and answer. The Premier loaded the order paper specifically with all government business. We had statements for over 3 hours. Then we had, and I think we have to make this very clear, we had more than one instance where the first and second and third reading was used, particularly for the Trade Commission Act and the Jury Act, which was used for the same purposes of second and third reading. And I'll speak a little bit about the Trade Commission a little later. Not allowing the public to have an input on the acts and the impact of these acts, particularly on the lives of the public and persons in the public space, and not even giving the House the opportunity to have an informal meeting to speak specifically on these pieces of legislation. The questions were relegated to the end of the order paper, as you heard earlier. Questions are had very important to the people of our constituents, but the people of this territory. For instance, there's a question specific about the Beaver Health Services Authority and a Cuban brigade whose particular tour of duty ends by the end of this month. The hospital just had its accreditation. You heard the minister speak in glowing terms about the accreditation of the hospital. That was in part because of the work that particular brigade has been doing in the hospital since COVID-19 pandemic, when they've been assigned to support the hospital during this period. What is going to happen when they leave, or if they're going to leave, to the patients whom they've been serving during this period? Patients who have built up a relationship with these particular doctors, nurses, and physicians. You've heard nothing from the government in terms of what are their plans moving forward. Are there going to be replacements for these individuals? These are very important questions on the minds of persons who access healthcare at that facility. It's very important questions of people who intend to access healthcare at that facility, yet the government don't see it important to answer the questions of the people. Particularly in my constituency, we have the senior center, which have been displaced because of the works that are being conducted on the community center. Over 20 plus seniors who look forward to the opportunity to congregate, to socialize and interact with their fellow seniors, for the past 2 months have not had somewhere to meet. I've written to the minister responsible on this matter. I've suggested alternate sites for which our seniors could find some place to meet, sit, and have that level of camaraderie that's important for persons in these twilight years. Nothing has been done as yet. I've written twice to the minister on this issue, asked questions, and the members don't see it fit to answer the questions and the things that concern the people of this Virgin Islands. Instead, we have a premier who got on the radio today, ranting and raving about all manner of things under the sun except the things that impact the lives of the people of this community and people of this territory. He shows a lack of maturity, political maturity for where we are as a country, a lack of political maturity in terms of dealing and addressing the issues of the day. You heard my honorable colleague just before me spoke, particularly about the legislative process and the importance of the process and the role that we all play to ensuring that the people of this territory get the best possible outcome to impact their lives and the lives of their family. He continues to twiddle his thumb. Well, Rome, in this case, BVI burns. We have situations where persons are losing their businesses. On a daily basis, you get calls from the public and business community of the challenges that they're facing. People are struggling just to make basic ends, to pay light bill, to feed their families, to put food on the table. In a time when the Premier needs to focus on the issues affecting our people and the economy, he rather go on the radio and play games, twiddle his thumb while BVI continues to burn. The issue of the Trade Commission and its suspension is one of those issues that I and the member for the second explained thoroughly the process and how we got to this point. I personally know because I work very closely on the process and the impact that the process will have on the economy, on the way of life for our people. And there were some things that were said that was incorrect. And the basis for which we're trying to sort of justify our actions in terms of the suspension. The issues of the fees. When the bill was passed in the Honorable House of Assembly, the fees were suspended. It was suspended because the House at the time, through its wisdom, said we will allow the Commission to look at the fees, to assess what is a reasonable and fair increase relating to the fees, particularly with the fact that you were working with a 30-plus-year-old legislation where fees were never advanced in the last 30-plus years. So that is not the assertion that the fees that were there would have been the fees that would have been implemented is false. Because the commission, and my understanding is that the commission had already looked at the fees and had made a proposal for a graduated increase in terms of how the fees will be increased. So that again is a false premise. There's also the premise that there wasn't any implementation plan or strategy for the commission. Again, false. The technocrats that work particularly on that piece of legislation clearly articulated in writing the approach for the implementation strategy. And those things are on the record and speaks to how that particular strategy would have been implemented and the plan for that implementation. This is one of the most consulted pieces of legislation. I know there was consultation under both administration, under the Smith administration and under the Andrew Foy administration, from Anigada to Jas Van Dyke. And then to arbitrarily go 1, 2, 3. It's gone through 3 different premiers and 4 different cabinets. And to go 1, 2, 3 without the benefit of consultation with the public, it shows this government is a government that doesn't want the input of the public, doesn't care for the input of the House of Assembly, because at the bare minimum, they could have had an informal meeting with the House of Assembly to discuss the changes and implications of the changes that are being proposed, particularly implications for the workers who have been asked to transition between both pieces of legislation, whether they stay within government or go to the commission. Now their lives are in limbo for the next 12 months. So there are additional implications to be had that have not been considered, particularly with this piece of legislation and the suspension that has come forward. It shows the government's aversion towards ensuring that there's enough input in the process. It's their way of the highway approach, and it's not an approach for this country moving forward. We as an opposition made it very clear it is not going to be business as usual. We're going to use every tool available for us to make sure we agitate on behalf of the people to ensure that we get the ultimate and optimal results for the people of these Virgin Islands, and we will do so. I look forward to any questions the media might have, and I will stop there and give my colleague, the member for the third, an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. As you all know, we have been here. We were here last week. It was not our intention. It was not our intention to be here today. The events that drove us here today is specific. It had to do with the last sitting on Tuesday. For me, and I'm sure for the rest of my colleagues, it was a sad spectacle to watch the cowardice of the premier as he pursued his goal to silence the opposition through weaponizing the order of the day in order to reshuffle the order paper, to relegate the question and answer period to follow public business. Question and answer period is supposed to follow the notice of motions given orally. And as you would have seen, the government took the opportunity to answer all questions their way through statements. They tried to circumvent having to answer the questions that we were about to pose, which we never got to pose. This behavior has been conveyed to the premier that it would not be tolerated. The first sitting, he went to the leader of the opposition and informed him that he would like to reorder the order paper. They did that. The leader of the opposition was made to know in no uncertain terms that we will tolerate it in the future. I spoke to the premier regarding it, and he agreed that he wasn't going to do it again. Unless, of course, circumstances dictate that it must be happening in order for the government to function. This government seems to want to use that procedure, routine, as their modus operandi. And I don't think that is going to work, because the leader of our opposition, understands that we are not going to tolerate it. I understood that the questions that we pose is an issue for government. I understood that in a meeting held in this building pertaining to the Standing Orders Committee, the premier informed the members that a letter was sent to the speaker complaining about the number of questions being asked, and that they be limited because the public service is overwhelmed with the questions. I want to point out that there's a section in the Constitution regarding privileges, immunities, and powers of the House. And it's section 82. It reads, the legislature may, by law, determine and regulate the privileges, immunities, and powers of the House of Assembly and of its members. But no such privilege, immunities, and powers shall exceed those of the Commons House of Parliament of the United Kingdom or of its members. You don't dictate to the House of Assembly how they should conduct their business. If, in our opinion, we in the opposition, if it's in our opinion, in order for us to conduct the business that we were elected to conduct, as you heard, our duty is to keep the government in check. If it's in our opinion that we need to ask 10 questions, 10 questions we will present. And those 10 questions we expect to ask. If it happens to be 40 questions, it will be 40 questions. The premier is someone who has served 1 4-year term so far. And when he sits where he sits and look across the aisle, and he looks and he sees the leader of the opposition who has served 4 4-year terms, and he's coming down. You see the member for the 2nd district who has already served 2 4-year terms. And the member for the 8th district, he has served 3 4-year terms. The member for the 6th has served 2 4-year terms already. And then he comes to me, I think I've served 6 already. You don't take that for granted. You don't try to minimize or importance. This group that you're looking at here, the premier, I'm preaching to the converted because the premier did not get a mandate to run this country. This group got a mandate to run the country from the people. So we have a responsibility, and I think we all take it seriously. We will take it seriously, and I didn't, Mr. Mayor, you haven't served a 4-year term yet, so don't get on my case. Okay, your time is coming. So we have a responsibility. When you hear the premier publicly stating, is stating that the reason our territory has the difficulties that we are facing with water is because of a contract that was signed 10 years ago by water contract. A contract that was signed for the production of water. And by the way, I want him to know that he has stooped to a new low by blaming his own party government. I never seen that before. But anyhow, if he thought he was coming after me, I'm not the one who did buy water. That was done by the leader of our party, which was Honorable Ralph T. O'Neill. That was not done by me. He is the one who took it to cabinet. He is the one who negotiated that contract, not me. But I'm not running from anything. Claiming that because of that contract we don't have money to fix the water issues. Well, someone please tell me how many billions of dollars in budgets that we have had over that 10-year period. I'm sorry, it's not 10 years, it's 14 years, I should say, from 2010 to now. Could call it 14 years. How many billions of dollars in contracts, in budgets that we have had since then? It tells me, and it should tell you the same thing, that there is no issues of water. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable to me, and it should be unacceptable to the public as well. Can't continue like this. When the premier is going to tell people that all of us over here in the opposition wants to be premier. Well, I wonder if he got to be premier because he didn't want to be premier. How did it happen? He must have wanted to be premier as well. I don't see that being any part of why we are here. I don't see it being any part of solving the issues in the territory. And I think that we ought to get on with it and make sure that he knows in no uncertain term that we in the opposition are not going to stop. We're not going to stop serving the people that we were elected to serve. And if that means having to walk out of the house, we will do it, and we'll do it again. But he is not serving this territory democratically. There is no way that the cabinet can sit downtown and come uptown and sit again. What happened on Tuesday is the cabinet that was sitting in the House of Assembly, not the legislature. You can't have a legislature without opposition, an elected opposition. There are sometimes when a government run the table, when they win all the seats. But that's not the case in our situation. The people solemnly desire to have an opposition. And I think that they have a solid opposition, people who are here prepared to work on their behalf. And I think that if we continue to let the government know that that's our position, that's what we will continue to do, and the people will understand and they will support us. The situation with the roads. I heard the premier a long time ago. He said that the reason our roads are in the shape that they're in is because it doesn't have proper drainage. Okay. What are you going to do? You're going to sit there and continue to say the same thing? This is 5 years now. Our roads are the same. I'm asking the minister regarding the roads, and they didn't even have, I would say, the savvy to know that if you're getting questions on a matter, try to fix it. Don't wait for another sitting for another set of questions. The issues that I'm raising about the roads in my district, I've been asking for years. The issues are still there. even though the minister acknowledged that the problem exists, the issues are still there. I've been asking about the sewage situation in my district. Well, it's not just in my district, it's the territory. The sewage treatment plant for the municipal Rotong area has been out of commission since 2017 after the hurricane. They're dumping raw sewage in Slaney. That's been going on since then. And nothing has been done to fix it. Every time you speak to them, you get some pablum answer. It's still the same. The incinerator has been broken for the last 2-3 years. Every time you ask about it, oh, they've been in contact with the manufacturer. There's a panel that needs to be replaced. But it's still there, not fixed. I spoke about the open burning. And all of us, not just me, when you go home, if it's not in your home, it's your neighbor, where someone has fallen ill because of the conditions in the territory. We have problems. I don't expect for us to come back here on matters, on frivolous matters like this, where frivolous on the behalf of the premier, something that he could have avoided. I asked him, I said, Premier, be the bigger man. This is not a fight that you need to take on. We have work to do. This territory has a lot of work to do. And if the opposition decides to block, to prohibit, to stand in the way of the government of progress, we can do it. I don't think any of us wants to do that. None of us. The senior citizens programs. How long can we continue to have our senior citizen programs out of commission? And these are things that can be done. There is money. Money is, as you said, $14 million SAP. A $14 million SAP that none of us have seen. But we were expected to vote in favor of it or pass it. How could you pass a SAP if you haven't read it? No. Better needs to be done. And that's why we are here today. To make sure that things don't continue the way they are. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Thank you, members. Thank you, members. Members of the press, you have heard us, and we're going to open the floor for the next 30 minutes for questions. We open the floor for questions.
When these kinds of questions come up, you would notice that the first thing that hits you is that there's no objectivity. No one looked at the issue. That question just came. Why don't you just stay because the government has a quorum? You have to take a stand. You have to make a point. And we took a stand because the government would continue to do what they have done if we sat there. The public needs to understand that we are working in their best interest. And working in their best interest meant that the government must know that democracy means that there is an opposition and there's a government. This case that we have here, the people voted where there's an opposition and there's a government. The opposition is there to hold the government accountable. We could not in good faith sit there in that meeting, in those meetings with them under the circumstances.
Add to what the colleague from the third is saying. The opposition has only a few items in their arsenal to deal with government. Any opposition, any place in the world, that is asking question of government, holding them to account through the Public Accounts Committee, and taking actions like we took some day ago. And there is one more that we can take. There's not many things that the opposition can do, but at some point in time, the opposition must show their disgust, and they must do it in a dramatic way in order for the government to get the message. Because and another thing, opposition will have their say, but the government will have their way. That's how simple it is.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kathy Richards, JTV News. Specific to the SAP that would have been passed and the Public Accounts Committee PAC, what recourse do you have now that they are passed? You hadn't the opportunity to debate or make any form of contribution. Also, given the fact that, as you would have said, several members would have said you weren't privy to the SAP prior to that sitting.
Well, Kathy, what I will say to you is that based on my experience in the House, sitting in the opposition or even sitting in the government side, what the government has lost is our perspective and our correction many times to what they are submitted. I think they have lost that. So it's our position. Yes, the government will have lost, and the people will have lost the benefit that we will have brought to some of those bills. But the government will have their way. That's the process. You know, it's yes, we couldn't stop it.
Honorable Walwyn, and if you can on that.
I have to agree with the leader of the opposition on the matter. I think your question is largely similar to the previous question. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the few to get the many. And at some point, you have to take a stand. I said in my statement, and it is true, that we have been speaking particularly to the Premier and some of its members as well, privately about certain things affecting the country and even in the way in which they're handling certain things legislatively. So it's not as if we just, got fed up and just walked out. It was a slow burn effect because we've been trying to get them to take their responsibilities more seriously than they are currently. And as Honorable Skelton said, they lost as well, because I think after being in the House with us, they should be able to appreciate the value that we bring, even to their own bills. Some of the bills that they have brought in the past, we have been more involved in getting those bills to the point where they need to be than some of their own members. Some of them you can't find them. They're in the bathroom, who is sleeping in the bathroom, who ain't show up at all, who ain't on a jet somewhere. And it's the opposition, if the Premier is going to be honest, that will sit down right there and work through clause by clause and help them to perfect the bills. So yes, they did lose, and the public did lose, but I think it was important for us to take that stand that we took on Tuesday, so that going forward, the Premier would straighten up and fly right and make sure that things operate the way that they're supposed to.
Kathy, if I may just tune in, and I lend my support fully to both the leader of opposition and member for the six in their sentiments. It is almost you see the attitudes even when we walked out, and I had some time on my hands, so I watched back the entire sitting, and you saw the level of immaturity and the laughter and the chuckling. So it's almost like they were happy to just be there. And that's what I think the people of Virgin Islands see. They're happy to be there because they're elected. But there's no show, there's no concern that they actually care about what is happening in the country. And that's what maturity is about. So the opposition's role is to help the government while challenging, while questioning it, and while holding the account to do the things that are necessary for the people of the Virgin Islands. They go back to what they know, and what they know is this blame game. It's almost like when you hear the Premier talk, I almost hear Nathan Drew. Because you're hearing this blame game of who did what and who did what. And all. We are not at this place. The Virgin Islands is at a critical stage of its life where we have an opportunity. You have a strong opposition willing to challenge you, willing to push things forward, to move the agenda of this country and the people that are hurting on every stage along. And we are here playing Dolly House, playing like we're running a mom and pop candy shop. But people are suffering. You heard member talking about who living in care, who can't find food, children out of school on Just Van Dyke. What are we doing in this country? It is no time for the games and trying to be king. You could be a king and have no clothes on. So it's time for us as an opposition to keep them to account, and we will continue to do that.
Kathy, if I can, I just want to weigh in on your question. At that sitting when we took our lunch break, a young man on a bike rode up to me, and I knew him from when he was at Altea Scatliff. He has a mental illness, and he's addicted to a substance. And I watched that young man, and I recalled the conversations I had with his family days before. I was prepared for the House of Assembly. I had my binder. I have learned this from the leader of the opposition. I had my markings. I was ready. I came there to work. Getting up and walking out was the only thing that I felt at that time would send a clear message. But just as you've asked us the question of why we walked out, there was nothing stopping the government from adjourning the House of Assembly and saying to us, colleagues, we need your input. You're the ones who are there going through the bills and are telling us this needs to be done and that needs to be done. And we could have been back in there on Thursday. But that $100,000 for travel for the Premier in the SAP till the end of the year was important. Thank you.
I have one more question, and it's directed to Honorable Penn, particularly to the consumer protection. Sorry. Yes. As it relates to the to Trade Commission, we would have heard Honorable Smith say repeatedly, the bill is not being repealed, but it's just been put on pause. Please, Honorable Skelton, help me, please. don't make me chuckle. Yes. So with that being said, why do we still have a challenge with the temporary, as it seems to have been put, suspension of that bill?
Well, the bill that was passed in the House on Tuesday, Kathy, is in fact a suspensionary act, which suspends any activity that would move the actual Trade Commission forward. So in essentially, we're actually not going more than suspended, we're going backwards. So we're going back to a 40-plus old legislation, about 30-year-plus year legislation that was modernized, updated in terms of the Business Licensing Act. We didn't have a modern consumer protection legislation, which is now on standby, on suspension. So none of the things that was envisioned over the last 8+ years where active work was done, particularly for development of the policies, development in terms of the legislative framework. And as I said earlier, that has spanned 4 cabinets, 4 premiers, and several legislators, cabinet members, and House Assembly members who have passed these pieces of legislation, we're now in the mode of working under the old 30-year plus legislation. Kathy, the business community is struggling. We need to get support to the business community. The Trade Department for the last 5 to 6 budgets have repeatedly come to the House of Assembly and say that they do not have enough staff. Transitional period. Let the Trade Commission operate, develop the policy framework, develop the structures. If you see challenges with pieces of legislation, you want to make amendment, you come back to the House. We do that all the time. We've been to the House. I recall the Legal Profession Act. We were at that piece of legislation for several sittings back and forth until we got it right. Nothing is wrong with while you're working to make those adjustments. You cannot just allow one, well, the Premier allowed one member, well, I can't blame the one member. It was a cabinet decision, a decision by the government to do this, to retard the progress of the business sector, to bring consumer protection legislation in place, to bring relief to the public, to first, for once and for all, create a one-stop shop for investments in this country, local investment and foreign direct investments. For too long, our investors on the ground have to be run around like chickens with their head cut off with no central point of contact. The Commission provided that central point of contact for investors, local and foreign, to get economic activity going. You heard my colleague in our last press conference talk about all the things that are happening everywhere around this territory, except for BVI. The last major investment that has happened in this country happened under the Dr. Smith administration. It was in my district, Scrub Island, and Oilnut Bay development. Those are the last 2 major developments that have happened in this country in the last 12 to 15 years. We are stagnant. There's no progress. There's no growth in the tourism sector.
At BVI Radio. You would have heard the member for the 6 said that the Premier not taking his legislative responsibility seriously. You would have heard the 8th district representative said he seems to lack the political maturity. The member for the 2nd district said when the walkout, you could have seen the immaturity by members. The 3rd district representative said you would have seen the cowardice of the Premier to silence the opposition. One general question. Do you think you will see the Premier as a coward? Do you see him as a coward?
I guess the question is mine. I don't see him as a coward. I see the Premier as a person who lacked the experience for the position he's in right now, and he needs to surround himself with people who can give him the best advice. And you can't live long enough to learn everything you need to learn on your own. So you need to learn from other people. You need to learn from books and your own experiences. I think he's missing a couple things that he needs to learn from. And that is other people's experiences, and he might turn out to be one of the best premier. But if he goes down the road he's going, as the members are saying, he probably end up one of the worst premier this country ever seen. So he needs to not take what we are saying as a personal attack, but for self-examination.
Mr. Fraser, you mentioned the word cowardice.
Yes, I did. The act was a coward act. It was a cowardly act. If you can't face your opponent, and when your opponent is no longer there, you relish in it, that's a cowardly act. You can't deal with the number of questions that we pose. It's a part of the legislative process. The standing orders, Standing Order 11 provide for an order paper which includes question and answers. And those questions and answers ordinarily are up front. Not too many things comes before the questions and answers. And in many jurisdictions, at least I know of Isle of Man, they precede the statement by ministers, and they do it for a reason, because ministers would not take the cheap way out by trying to circumvent answering the questions through statements. So that's that's the act that I was talking about as cowardice. That's cowardice.
Mr. Walwyn, you mentioned the whole issue of the Standing Finance Committee and the attempts being made to reduce the number of questions being asked by members of the opposition. And he also spoke about the attempts by the Premier to go back to an act of in the 1970s to make it available for a member changing the word of the minister position. Are you, sir, and other members of the House of in the opposition going to sit back and allow this to happen?
I think the point that the fact that I brought it to the fore and laid it out and took the time to lay it out in the manner in which I did, and the fact that at the meeting, myself and Albert Skelton, who were present, made it clear to him that you can't tinker with the Constitution. The Constitution has a specific meaning, and the spirit of it interprets minister in a particular way. The standing orders cannot trump the Constitution. We made that very clear. But the walking out of the House of Assembly now brings the attention of the public, because it's not just the opposition alone. At the end of the day, it's our country, and the public has to also show its contempt for where we are. When you travel the length and breadth of this country, nobody's pleased with the state of the country. Nobody, anybody who loves this country cannot say honestly, whether you're a Virgin Islands Party supporter or not, you cannot say based on the state of affairs of this country, as a Virgin Islander first, that you're pleased. You'll be lying. And so what we are doing is bringing things to the attention of the public so that we can join together to get the attention of the government. You're heading the wrong way. Straighten up and do things in the proper manner. That is what we're trying to achieve.
Mr. Skelton, as opposition leader, would you allow that to happen, you and the other members?
I think the member for the six just define exactly what basically he and I sat in the. It was the Standing Orders Committee we sat in.
Yes, understanding
Standing orders, and we make it quite plain that he can't do that. You know, the Constitution cannot. You cannot make a law or do something that is contrary to the Constitution. That's illegal.
And just one last point. The Premier has been on this movement for greater autonomy. He slowed it down a little bit now. He said independence before. He kind of slaying his. The point I'm making is that you cannot get to that point unless you build the institutions of the country. It is through building the institutions that people get the confidence that when a referendum is brought, they will say, yes, you are at the point of political maturity where we can trust you fully with the reins of the country. If you can't, you don't understand. It's almost like he's playing the Three Stooges game with himself, because he's hitting himself over the head. On one hand, you want greater autonomy. On the other hand, the institution, the House of Assembly, that is supposed to usher that in, you're tinkering with it, you're breaking it down, you're using it as a rubber stamp. It's like the Premier is having a debate with himself and he's not winning.
Finally, Mr. Turnbull, you spoke about the track in which the Premier and his government is taking, the trend similar to April 2022, down that same road. And I wanted to explain that. And he also said, change will come by will or by force. Those two things.
Well, before I go to that direct question, Zan, I just want to piggyback off of where Honorable Walwyn left in terms of building institutions. And I go back to the suspension of the bill, because that bill, if you remember correctly, Honorable Penn was there, was supposed to be accompanied with a suite of legislations, as they say, some 47 legislations that dealt with the economy and building the economy of the Virgin Islands. You talk about 1995 to present. So that is the continuous amount of work that was put in to bring this thing into force. And then you're taking a responsibility from 7 persons to a board, who can establish committees to bring in to support the actions of the commission and the board to help drive business and help drive things in the economy. And you now suspend it to allow one person to continue to have authority. You're walking backwards, just like Honorable Waldwin said, with trying to change the rules to suit you. It cannot be about you. The things that, the actions that are being taken, it is almost about this egotistical type of behavior that I want what I want. But where is the greater good? And that's what discipline talks about. The greater good, letting what you want die so the greater good, the things that the people of the Virgin Islands need, could survive. So for me, what I'm saying is the actions you see the actions, you see the mannerisms almost repeating themselves, which is what got us here in the first place. And those of us who were in the House of Assembly, who were fighting to keep us from going that direction, we are not. And the members who are here now, 6 of us in opposition, will not allow, because you already see it. You already see the head of the snake coming back up in a different form. Let's cut it off, because the Virgin Islands cannot afford it. We don't need anyone telling us what needs to happen. The people of the Virgin Islands are saying what they need. The people of the Virgin Islands are saying what we require, and we require leadership, and that is what we are hoping, that this government could hopefully make a 360. Hopefully make a 360 and stop the childish type behavior that they're operating in, and be men and women leaders who were elected by the people of the Virgin Islands to lead them from where we are to where we need to go. That's what hope is about. That's what leadership is about.
Good evening, y'all. Is it on? Rush Skinner, BVI Beacon. The Premier claimed that public officers needed more time to compile the answers to some 120 odd questions. How many days in advance did you all submit those questions? I understand the time limit's about 7 days.
Yeah, the standing orders require 7 days on both ends. But previously, as I was told, I think it was 4 at one point, so it was adjusted.
Do y'all believe that 7 days is enough time?
Absolutely.
We have never had a complaint of this nature before. Never. As far as my memory goes. Far back as what it was called the Legislative Council, and now the House of Assembly. Those of us who were in the government between 2011 and 2019, when even Honorable Fraser and Honorable Foy won the opposition, there was one sitting when Honorable Foy asked me almost 50 questions, and I answered all of them. The permanent secretaries went out and did what they were supposed to do and answered the question, and we worked together. I think part of the problem that we're seeing coming out is that the ministers are not properly seized of the subjects that they have responsibility for. So they're relying entirely, because I mentioned in my remarks, one minister indicated that he was only reading what the technocrats provided for him. So a technocrat gives you something and you drive uptown to the House of Assembly to just read it out like that. You have not checked to make sure the answer is properly, the questions are properly answered, that you have not put in certain parts, that nothing is missing. So that is in fact the problem. The other side of the equation is this. We sat down through, somebody called the number, 20-something statements. 23 statements on Tuesday, each being about 15 minutes in length. The very same civil servants that they're referring to are the very same ones who would have had to prepare those statements. So what's the point? Then you have these political consultants that are being paid $10,000 a month of taxpayers' money. What are they doing down there then? So can they be put to work to help you to answer the questions, or they're just there to be political spin doctors at the expense of the Treasury? It's absolute nonsense. And it just basically shows you, or raises the question as to really who is running the government. Because if the civil servants are in fact complaining, you ought to say to them, this is the House of Assembly, the highest lawmaking body in the land. There's a separation of powers in government. There's no way the executive should be telling the legislature what to do. All of this just shows a government that is completely out of their depth, and a leader who has not a clue where he's taking the ship of state to. And you must always be wary of leaders who are taking you to places where they have never, ever been. And that is the state that we're in now.
Mr. Penn, you mentioned a level of bureaucracy as it would imply a problem for effective legislation. Do you have perhaps a proposition of what exactly to streamline, especially in light of the ongoing Commission of Inquiry?
I mentioned that specifically concerning the Trade Commission, and in fact, just in general, in getting things done in government takes forever. We see, particularly in Trade Department, when I was there, the whole process of just getting staff. I know there's some staff that we apply for, and I think I'm still waiting on those staff, and I've left there almost close to 6 years now. I've left that particular department. That was one of the impetus for us to move beyond administrations. The commission, a statutory organization, has a level of agility to get things done quicker, to get things done more efficiently. The business community needs a level of agility to move forward. Businesses can't wait on a government process to move forward. They have to make decisions. They need a responsive entity, a responsive organization to be able to help them to move the decisions forward. Just the same when we did in terms of the Financial Services Commission. The Registry of Corporate Affairs could not be what it is today if it was still under government. You needed to move away from government to be able to offer the level of innovation, efficiency in terms of hiring and getting the skill sets that you need quickly, and to be able to make timely decisions for a very critical industry. And we saw the business community in the same light. Businesses are feeling the pinch. We're talking about getting a National Business Bureau funded and staffed with this bureaucracy in government. When? It's impossible for that to happen. I have seen it. I have worked there. I see the challenge that they will face. I would love for it to happen. But my good Eastern or common sense tells me that what is there, it cannot happen. It cannot. And what we've done, we've
Piggyback just on something that Honorable Penn mentioned. I recall asking the Minister for Trade a specific question, I think it was in the sitting in July, about the National Business Bureau and the issues that were very well articulated by the Honorable Penn that the business community is facing. The suspension is what, 12 months? The minister looked me squarely in the eye and said to me that the National Business Bureau will be up and running to provide financing and support in January of 2024. I asked a question specifically, yes, because there are a lot of businesses in the BVI, but there are also a lot of businesses in District 6 who I know can expand and do a lot better if they had not just some financial support, but also some support to build capacity and how to run their businesses properly. I am putting her on notice that she said January 2024 to me, and if January 2024 passes and that National Business Bureau is not ready with the funding in place, there will be some issues around here in relation to that.
If I could just piggyback on my two colleagues, Penn and Walwyn. In this country, history has taught us that anything that is you say is temporary, it takes another 20 years before it moves again. And my engineering that I used to practice says that if you stop a train from running, it takes twice as much energy or 3 times as much energy to get it moving again. So that's the problem with stopping things. I believe what could have happened is a different approach, but I don't have all the information to advise. But that could have happened through a different approach where you move in incremental steps and still keep the trade commission moving while you work out whatever skills you had to work out.
May add to that as well. Um, the commission, the trade commission, and its board were moving towards a statutory body, so they would have some level of independence to be able to carry out the functions needed. To halt that progress, for whether it's for clarity or understanding or familiarity, it says that we are willing to put work of the public service, put work and money, and this is one of the things I want to focus on in this comment. The amount of money and resources that have been spent from 1995 to 2020 when this act came into force, we are willing to put it on the side. For what? We can walk and chew gum. There's enough capacity, and that's what I spoke about the last time. There's enough education in this country. There's enough educated persons and enough resources. You had a board put together with a chairperson and members from legal profession to religious community to the business sector that were able to support it. So I saw it as the ability to support the minister and even the government to move our agenda along, even if it wasn't functioning in its full capacity, but to halt it. And the reasons why were given of why it was halted, they're not satisfactory to good common sense. They're not satisfactory to all the work and all the energies that have been put in and resources that have been put in to move our BVI forward. This is yet another example of something now that we are misstepping on and forcing the rest of the region, the rest of the competitors to move ahead of us. And by the time we get 12 months down the road, we will be playing catch up again, just as we are in tourism and just as we are in different sectors. So we have the ability to do more than one thing at a time. And again, our foreparents did it with less education, with less resources, but we are taking and abusing systems for our own purpose.
We'll take one more short question.
A simple yes or no will suffice from each of y'all. Do you, any of
A short question.
then from you? Would the meeting have reached the question and answer stage had y'all stayed?
Of course not, because they were reordering the other people.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I have 4, absolutely, and I intend to ask them. I love you guys so much. Thank you. Honorable Skelton, leader of the opposition, I'm going to put this question to you because we've heard from Honorable Penn a lot on this, so I want to hear from you. Besides the 1, 2, 3 through the House and the 13, 40 years conversation, what is the real immediate impact on the territory in suspending the Trade Commission Act for 12 months? Will it kill business, stop investment into the territory, etc.? The immediate impact, or is this much to do about nothing? The minister said she will enact the Consumer Protection Bill and the Trade Bureau. Isn't the board an additional layer of the same bureaucracy we speak of? And it's kind of couple in one.
And you ask it. let me see if I could put my comment in context. I negotiated with the Premier and the Speaker to have a meeting on the 31st to deal with the Public Accounts Committee meeting and questions. Over the next 3 or 4 days, I think it started on the 31st. So on the 30th, we had these amendments to the other people. First amendment, second amendment, and the last one was the third amendment. And on the second amendment, I saw the suspension of the thing. So I never had an opportunity to go and study to figure out what were going to be achieved.
But are you familiar with the Trade Act? What is the impact?
I must say I'm not.
Okay, can I just go?
No, no,
You want to say something?
I think I need to help respond
Yeah.
my colleague on this. I think you made a comment that the minister is going to enact the consumer protection legislation and the Trade Act. She can't. You can't enact those acts in the current form. You will have to then come back to the House because those acts were designed and drafted to work under the commission, not to work in the ministry or in the Department of Trade. So you have to actually come back into the House and make substantive amendments to those acts. To go back to operate for 12 months? Or how long are those drafts going to come to the House? You're saying that you're suspended at best 12 months. So why are you going to make changes to the legislation as they are now drafted, to put them in place, to come back to put the commission in place, to come back to the House and amend them again? It suggests that there's something more at foot.
Okay, well,
there's no intention then of bringing the Trade Commission back based on what your comment, that comment indeed was made by the minister.
But even if there are changes, just a follow-up question on that, and I'll make it quick, even if there were changes in the Consumer Protection Act can go through now, isn't it better than it being enacted in 2026, another 2 to 3 years from now, which is what the board suggested?
Well, the board could suggest, but the minister has the right to say, look, we want this to be in place now.
Okay,
The board serves at the pleasure of the minister.
Right.
So the minister could have said that this is what we want in place now and ensure that the staffing and the pieces are in place and the funding to support the consumer protection legislation to move forward. I am not aware that the board said that. If the board indeed said that, the minister need to bring that to the public if she haven't already did.
So it almost could be much to do about nothing. Okay.
I disagree with that comment. That's not a fair comment.
The minister has said that she met with the staff over at Trade, and the feedback from them is part of why she was pulling back. Have you sat with the staff at Trade? And if you did, what are their concerns with the suspension? Are their lives really in limbo as the department falls back to as it was? What is the real impact on them as you see and that you've mentioned?
The staff at Trade was involved, particularly involved in the process when I was there at Trade, working along to get these pieces of legislation to where they are. Staff have expressed to me their particular concern. Their members,
recent days?
Up to today, when I was in the radio, I got a message from a staff member who's concerned, particularly with the transition of the employees, wanting to know what happens to employees who opted to either stay with government or be part of the Trade Commission as part of the transitionary period that was put in place for the staff to make a decision. Those are things based on the legislation that I read and I saw that came forward for the suspension that weren't addressed in the legislation. An informal meeting or a first reading would have given us an opportunity to get those particular pieces worked out. Issues of staffing and human resources, issues of the concerns of the minister, let us discuss these things. We had an opportunity to extend the transitionary period for the legislation. That was a compromise, a fair compromise.
All the work that was done to bring us to this point and to have all that work eroded just by a 1, 2, 3 in the House. So you ignored the processes that got you to this point. And you're now going to 1, 2, 3 to suspend it based on, again, I reiterate, positions and points that they don't materialize into effectiveness given all the history and the context that was put into this legislation. So yes, the staff will feel uncomfortable. Yes, the board and all the plans that they were tasked with achieving is now in limbo because you have to now walk back legislation. You have to walk back changes to the House of Assembly to do what you want to do as an individual rather than what is best on a holistic level for the country.
And just a follow up to that, did you ask the staff member to reach out to the minister, and maybe she has a plan to speak with the staff? If we,
I don't
if she's-
interfere with the minister's work. The minister has to do her work.
no, I'm saying, did you ask the staff to liaise with the minister?
That's not
on
my
it?
that's not my place to
Okay.
ask the staff what to do. Tell the staff what to do.
My last question is probably to all of you. Maybe the opposition leader could answer if it's possible. Quite often, each member is asking kind of the same exact question, but for their district. Is there any way to kind of consolidate question? Is each member of the opposition, do you guys see each other's questions? Like, do you sit in a planning meeting before submitting so you can kind of be more effective? I don't know if it can work like that. So I'm
I think
asking.
we are very effective right now. It's just that the other side is a bit disorganized, so they're not as effective as we are. But if you even read the questions that you think are duplicate, some of the questions ask in a general sense of what of on a subject, and others are being a little more specific. So they're not the same question.
I want to support the leader because I heard that narrative brewing out there, and it is not true. Yeah, that question. I've heard the government trying to spin that, and my simple answer is this: if all of us ask you the same question on the same topic, cut and paste the answer and put it on. What's your problem? The truth really is that they do not want to answer the questions. What is the probability of all six of us asking a question in exactly the same way? That is false. That is false.
And you have to put into context as well. You only have 2 follow-ups to a question. Besides the answers given not relating to the question, you only have 2 follow-ups to your question. So if I ask the same question as my colleague from the 8th and my colleague from the 6th, 2 times 3, that's 6 follow-ups you get. So it's a win-win for us. But 12 hours of questions and answers or 12 hours sitting? The questions are not the same.
But that is not the case. That's a falsehood.
Questions are not the same.
Cindy, if I can weigh in. So we sat and we listened to 3 hours, 23 statements from the ministers of the government on Tuesday. Some of those, as Honorable Fraser said, some of those same statements had in some of the responses to the questions that we asked. So at the end of the day, I can understand the concern, and I'll say this again, right? I will ask my colleagues again that we will look at what we do. Because if it's a concern from the public, we will genuinely look at it. That's my commitment to the public. But as it stands, no, Honorable Fraser, if it's a concern, we'll look at it. But what I'm saying is, as it stands, Cindy, if the government can take the time to make those statements, they can take the time to answer the questions, especially if they're trying to answer the questions before they're asked. If you go back to when we had the sitting in June, we got responses in September. They took the time between June and September to address the questions we were asking.
Support my colleagues on this as well, Cindy, in terms of your question. I think our questions are very poignant. Some, particularly the district representative, are very specific to specific needs of our constituents, and some of them are some general needs. For example, in my opening statement, I mentioned the point about the Cuban doctors. That is an important concern for many persons who have to access care at that facility. Persons who have grown accustomed of their physician, who've been working along with them, and there's no indication to them that there's a replacement, There's no indication to them that there's an extension of the engagement with these particular physicians. So these are things that the public needs answers. And for the government to just shove these things on the side as if is they're insignificant or unimportant and use all the different spin that the $10,000 a month consultants are being used to do, to try to spin the narrative on social media, while our people continue to suffer. We ask the questions and the concerns that are concerns of our constituents and are concerns of the entire territory. And we're going to continue to do our job.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to thank the media for their questions. I want to thank the listening audience and those watching for staying with us for approximately 2 hours. I hope that our explanations that we gave, you understand why we had to take the actions we took, and we will continue to fight for the needs of all people from Antigua to Jocelyn Dykes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say good night, colleagues. Thanks for everything. I wrap up.